Welcome back to the NYC, everybody. After doing the complete history of the Ninja Turtles a couple years back, it's fitting that I do another NY hero. So let's talk about the friendly neighborhood hero, Spider-Man. But you all know him by now, created by Stan Lee and Steve Bitcoin in 1962. Real name Peter Parker, geeky superhero, bitten by radioactive spider, balances real life and hero life, etc. That's why I'll be doing the movie versions, since there's just so much of this spider that I can't talk about all. Back in 1979, due to the massive success of the franchise, Marvel Comics attempted to bring the web wielder to the big screen. It wasn't until the 80s when interest in making the movie was put in after the success of Marvel's rival studio DC's flagship heroes film Superman in 1978. The first attempt was to have B-movie director Roger Corman to direct the film, but when his contract with Marvel expired, Marvel had to try again. It wasn't until the 90s when Avatar director James Cameron came on board with Cargo Picture to develop that Spider-Man movie. In James's original script, it was a lot more adult with use of the bad words, violence, and one scene that had Peter and Mary Jane doing it. It would have also had villains like Electro and Sandman as the main villains of the film. However, Columbia Pictures, the distributions of the project, rejected James's script, feeling that it didn't feel like Spider-Man at all. So they decided to replace Jamie with David Fincher as director, who he planned to adapt the Gwen Stacy die story instead of making it an origin story. To quote David, "I was never interested in the Genesis story. I couldn't get past a guy getting bit by a red spear. Red spear. It was a problem. It was not something that I felt that I could do straight faced. I wanted to start with Gwen Stacy and the Green Goblin, and I wanted to kill Gwen Stacy." Dang, dude, that's messed up. After many rejected directors, Sony eventually brought in Sam Raimi, who was attached to direct the film in January of 2000. For the role of the Spider-Man, there were many considerations like Ian McGregor, Colin Firth, Scott Speedman, Wes Bentley, and the late Heath Ledger. However, Raimi had one actor in mind, Tobey Maguire, who manages to get the part after some promising audition test. Finally, in May 3rd, 2002, Spider-Man Web spun his way into theaters. The film stars Peter Parker, played by Tobey Maguire, an early high schooler who gets bitten by a radioactive spider during a field trip and ends up developing spider-like powers, which at first he uses for personal gain, but after his Uncle Ben's death, he decided to use his powers for the greater cause while facing against the Green Goblin, played by Willem Dafoe. The film stars Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin, Kristen Dunst as Mary Jane, James Franco as Harry Osborn, Norman's son, Rosemary Harms as Aunt May, and J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. The film is basically an origin story, but did its own thing, like have the Green Goblin be more sympathetic, and as the main villain. Upon release, the film was critically praised for its acting, visual effects, and writing. It was also a box office hit, earned $825.8 million, becoming the third highest grossing film of 2002 behind Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets and Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. The film was even nominated for 2 Oscars as well. Due to the success of the first film, a sequel was put in and eventually released on June 25th, 2004. Set 2 years, Peter is struggling between being Spider-Man and his normal life, while also having to face a new foe called Doc Ock, who was actually Peter's role model, Dr. Octavius. The film brought back many of the actors from the first film, while featuring Alfred Molina as the new villain, Doc Ock, who, fun fact, Doc Ock was originally a side villain for the first film before becoming the main big bad in the sequel. The film carries on themes of human struggles and fighting against evils inside all of us. Like before, the film was critically acclaimed for its emotional and deep writing, excellent acting, and amazing visuals, especially from Doc Ock's tentacles, which are sometimes puppets done by Steve Johnson's Edge effects. Yes, really! And while it did gross less than the first film, it was still a success with $795.9 million, as well as winning an Oscar for Best Visual Effects. To this day, fans consider this not only one of the best Spider-Man movies, but also one of the best superhero movies in general. In May 7, 2007, Spider-Man 3 was released. In this one, Peter has to deal with having a future with Mary Jane, while also dealing with 3 villains, like Venom, played by Topher Farce, his best bud turned foe, Harry, who figured out Peter's Spider-Man in the last film, and the Sandman, played by Thomas Hayden Church, who was actually the same guy who killed Uncle Ben, while Peter ends up infected by a virus that raises his negative emotions. Spider-Man featured a far more darker and even violent tone. It appeared dealing with his friend turned enemy, Harry, now the Green Goblin, as well as dealing with his inner demons with the introduction of the symbiote. Sadly, the film got mixed reviews, with most criticism for its convoluted writing and story. Despite this, it was still a box office hit with $890.8 million, and the film has gained a cult following over time, mainly in memes with Bully Maguire. Sam had plans to continue the franchise with a fourth one due for May 2011, where it would feature Mysterio and the Vulture as the villains. It was also going to be the start of a new set of films. However, Sony and Raimi were not getting along with many clashes, and so the fourth film was scrapped altogether. If Raimi eventually ditching out on Spider-Man. So, instead of making a fourth film, Sony decided to reboot the Spider-Man movies instead of a whole new cast and crew. Making a video? And so, in July 3rd, 2012, The Amazing Spider-Man was released, directed by Mark Webb and starring Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker. This reboot once again sees the origin of Spider-Man. However, this time this sees Peter developing his powers during high school, while also facing the villainous Lizard. The film featured a far darker and gritty tone compared to the Raimi films, with more graphic death of Uncle Ben and Spider-Man dealing with the police. Another thing that sets the film apart is how it was the first time we saw Peter's parents. Upon release, the film was released to mostly positive reviews, with most praise for its acting, visual effects, and score by the late James Horner, which was one of his last scores before his death in 2015, as well as being ahead at the box office with $758.7 million. 2 years later, a sequel was released on May 2nd, 2014 in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. In this film, Peter must protect his new girlfriend Gwen Stacy while facing villains like Electro and even this version of Harry Osborn, aka the Green Goblin. Even learn about his parents' death. The film continued the gritty tone from the first film, but featured a more complex plot that felt either rushed or crammed into. This film also adopted the death of Gwen Stacy, but was not really well told. Overall, the film got mixed reviews, with some calling it the worst Spider-Man film ever, even if it did well at the box office with $716.7 million. it was the lowest grossing Spider-Man film of all time. This was supposed to be the part of a Spider-Man cinematic universe with spin-offs and even more sequels planned, but because of the troubled productions, mainly from the 2014 Sony hack, that was too scrapped, just like last time. Instead, it was Marvel Productions to reboot Spider-Man once again, this time in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as this new version of Spider-Man came not in his own film, but in 2016's Captain America Civil War, where he was portrayed by young Tom Holland, where he was praised for his youthful personality. The year, 1 year later, on July 7, 2017, Spider-Man returned to the big screen with Spider-Man: Homecoming. Where in here, Spidey must balance both his regular life and superhero hobby, while trying to impress his superior Tony Stark and facing against the Vulture. This version of Spider-Man is a lot more different compared to the past films, as it's a lot more lighthearted and upbeat, with Spidey being more juvenile and youthful. It also ditches the whole origin story feel as it established Spidey as a straight-laced superhero. The film was critically praised for Tom Holland's performance, more lighthearted feel, and just being a funny film, as well as being a box office hit with $880.9 million, especially given this film has the lowest budget compared to the others with $175 million. Spidey would later make appearances in both Avengers: Infinity War in 2018 and in Endgame in 2019, where he would get a new suit called the Iron Spider. And of course, in that same year was Venom, a spin-off of Venom, featuring Venom. But I won't talk about the spin-off since this is more on Spider-Man, and neither of these films did well at all. But of course, we can't talk about Spider-Man movies without mentioning Into the Spider-Verse. Released on December 14th, 2018 by Sony Pictures Animation of Hotel Transylvania fame and produced by Phil Lord and Chris Miller, this animated film follows Miles Morales, who gets bitten by a radioactive spider and is forced to become the new Spider-Man with help of several Spider-Man from different dimensions. What made this film stand out as a Spider-Man film is how it stars a new main hero that's not Peter Parker, but African-American Miles Morales, giving this film a unique spin on Spider-Man mythos. But what truly made this film stand out as an animated film was its unique animation style that blended both 2D and 3D CGI, mixing CGI with comic book effects and illustrations, giving the film a quite unique look compared to any other animated film. Couple that with some great comedy, some intense action, and genuine heart, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was released to critical acclaim, with some calling it the best Spider-Man since 2. And it did well with $394 million, even winning an Oscar for Best Animated Feature. Into the Spider-Verse will end up paving the way for more CGI films with unique styles, such as The Bad Guys, TMNT Mutant Mayhem, and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. In July 2nd, 2019, MCU's Spider-Man returned in Far From Home, and here Peter and his classmates are on a school field trip to Europe, but Peter gets recruited by Nick Fury of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Mysterio to face against the elements. It featured the same cast as the previous film, while featuring Samuel L. Jackson reprising as Fury. This film would be the final of the MCU Phase 3, as well as the end of the 23 film Infinity Saga Mytho arc, a coda to the Infinity Saga's climax in Avengers Endgame. Like before, the film got critical praise for its acting, writing, and lighthearted tone, but that was nothing compared to how it did at the box office, as it grossed $1.133 billion, making this the first Spider-Man movie and even Sony film to earn $1 billion. But a few years later, in December 17, 2021, the third of the MCU Spider-Man films was released with No Way Home. Set after the events of the last film, Mysterio manages to frame Peter by revealing his true identity, which throws his life into chaos. So he asks Doctor Strange to make his identity a secret again, but he refuses, and after a heated argument, a spell ends up causing the Spider-Man multiverse to collide, bringing villains from other Spider universe like Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Electro, and the Lizard into Peter's universe. This film is known for bringing back many of the characters from past Spider-Man films and getting back their actors like William Dafoe, Alfred Molina, Thomas Hayden Church, Jamie Foxx, Rhys Ifans, and even Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield as the previous Spider-Man to reprise their roles, making this the first appearances of those targets in a long time. Upon release, the film once again was praised for its visual effects, action, emotion, and emotional core, and was a major box office smash with $1.921 billion, making one of the highest grossing films of all time, even getting nominated for an Oscar for Best Visual Effects. Back onto the Spider-Verse, Sony Pictures Animation released the sequel called Across the Spider-Verse in June 2nd, 2023. This sees Miles become the new Spider-Man while also dealing with the villain Spot and find about the Spider Society, which is a society of many spider peoples led by Spider-Man 2099. The film continues the amazing visuals of its predecessor while also expand on them, as well as expand on the Spider-Man multiverse with the Spider Society. At 140 minutes, it marks as the longest anime film in the US. Upon release, the film received massive acclaim like before for its amazing visuals, great comedy, and emotional core. Like last time, getting nominated for an Oscar for Best Animated Feature, it was even a bigger hit with $690 million. Being out the Smurfs movie from 2011 as the highest grossing film from Sony Pictures Animation. Beat that, Smurfs. Boy, what a history! Spider-Man was already a recognizable character, but the movies helped this Webman into becoming an even bigger sensation with a fourth MCU Spider-Man in development, a third Spider-Verse called Beyond the Spider-Verse, and even more spin-offs. Here's to more adventures with this friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.